Hello and welcome everyone to the evolution of a Minecart Station. I thought we had finished this series.
Not yet, no.
Wait, what?
There were some complaints about how you left the last series.
There were complaints?
Yes, there were some complaints that the instant droppers technique was too expensive.
Some people thought instant droppers were too expensive?
Yes.
They do realise this is like an end game station, right?
I don't know, but would it really hurt if you tried to find any other alternatives?
Well, I guess not. Okay, roll the tape. Until we achieve flawlessness. This was the Minecart Station design presented last time. What are the problems with this design? The main problem with this design is it requires a lot of droppers, and therefore requires infrastructure to be present in your world. For example, gathering together all the iron necessary to craft all the droppers may seem like an impossible task unless you already have an iron golem farm in your world. Some people in the comments were asking, why can't you just use a storage minecart leaving on the same rail in the opposite direction, or even just have a minecart bounce back if the station is full? The fact is, you could, but it would have similar problems to the Minecart Station of episode 8, with the added problems that the minecart could get stuck in unloaded chunks between the two stations, causing you to have an unexpected treat when you leave the station in the opposite direction. Ideally, you would load these chunks with redstone, however this has many complications, and if we were to do so, we would want the items to transport as fast as possible, so we can travel over the largest distance in the time we are given. Minecarts therefore aren't really the best solution for this, and if you still want to use minecarts, you would want to permanently load these chunks, which is very RAM intensive. The system I'm going to show is instead going to use ice and water to send the item as fast as we possibly can, while using as few droppers as possible. So what about chunk loading? When the player logs into a world, a timer starts counting up by 1 every game tick. We will call the value of this counter game time, or GT for short. Every 900 ticks, or when GT modulo 900 equals 0, the game will forcefully unload all chunks that shouldn't be loaded. Chunks that should be loaded are chunks loaded by the player. Chunks that shouldn't be loaded are chunks loaded by redstone or the spread players command. This means that, for example, if we load the chunks when GT equals 899, the chunks will only stay loaded for 1 tick. If we load the chunks when GT equals 900, 2 things could happen, depending on how the game processes things. Number 1, the game unloads the chunks and then processes the redstone, reloading the chunks. Or 2, the game processes the redstone, loading the chunks, and then unloads the chunks, therefore they didn't load at all. I think the game processes things like number 2, however I have not extensively tested this yet. Ultimately, this means that if we load the chunks at any one arbitrary time, we'll be guaranteed only 0 ticks of chunk load time, i.e. we cannot guarantee that the chunks will load at all. I will call the amount of time that the chunks are guaranteed to be loaded LT. So when we load the chunks at any one arbitrary time, LT equals 0. This isn't too satisfactory. Ideally, we would at least want the chunks to be loaded for some time. So what happens when we load the chunks twice, each time separated by a time delta t? So let's test with delta t equals 1 and gt equals 900. So we will try to load the chunks first when gt equals 900, but the chunks will instantly unload again. But then we will try to load the chunks at GT equals 901. Now the chunks will stay loaded until GT equals 1800. So when GT equals 900 and delta T equals 1, the specific load time for this circumstance is 899. So let's try another example. We'll keep dt equals 1, but we'll change gt to 899 instead of 900. Well, we will try to load the chunks first when gt equals 899, and again at gt equals 900, but this second time the chunks will instantly unload again. So ultimately the chunks have only stayed loaded for 1 tick. Here we can see that when dt is 1, the specific load time is 900 minus the modulo of gt and 900. However, the guaranteed load time is the minimum of all those load times. Ultimately, LT is the minimum of the specific load time of GT. So for delta T equals 1 tick, LT equals 1 tick, i.e. the guaranteed load time is 1 tick. From this data, we might think maybe there is a direct proportionality between delta T and LT. So let's try delta T equals 900. Example 1. Delta T equals 900 and GT equals 900. We'll try to load the chunks at GT equals 900, but they will instantly unload. Then we will try again at 1800, but the chunks will again instantly unload. Thus, when delta T equals 900 and GT equals 900, the specific load time equals 0. Let's take example 2. Let's test when delta T equals 900 and GT equals 899. We'll try to load the chunks at GT equals 899, but 1 tick later GT equals 900 and they will instantly unload. Then we will try again at GT equals 1799. But then 1 tick later GT equals 1800 and the chunks will again instantly unload. So when delta T equals 900 and GT equals 899, in this case the load time is 2 ticks. The trend seems to be that when delta T equals 900, the specific load time for these examples is 2 times 900 minus GT. Or put simpler, 1800 minus 2 times GT. Ultimately, when delta T equals 900, the LT is the minimum of the specific load times of GT. And that minimum is 0 ticks, occurring when GT equals 900. Here are some other examples. From these examples we get these equations, and if we equate these two equations we'll find the maximum dt, which will produce the maximum LT. So to get the maximum possible guaranteed chunk load time, we have to send a pulse, and 450 game ticks later, send another pulse. This will load the chunks for 450 game ticks. From this result, we can see that we will want our items to reach their destinations within 450 ticks. Items in water streams on ice travel at roughly 0.4 blocks per game tick. Therefore, in 450 ticks, the item will be able to travel 180 blocks. But of course, most destinations will be further than just 180 blocks away. Therefore, to go extra long distances, we can add checkpoints along the way. The items will move a bit like how electrons do in a wire. All checkpoints will contain a minecart item and a dispenser. All minecarts from all checkpoints will be dispensed at the same time and moved to the next checkpoint. When the item reaches the checkpoint, it is sucked up by a hopper and pushed into the dispenser. Because we have divided the journey into lots of small parts, this transport system will seem extremely fast, even though the individual items are travelling extremely slowly. In total, this is our other minecart transportation method. This method requires 2 times as much redstone, creates 5 times more lag, and is 400 times slower than the instant dropper lines method. However, this design does require 1/230th of the amount of iron required by the instant dropper setup. This method may be the best for those players who don't have a solid infrastructure in their worlds, but personally, I just make a small iron golem farm and go for the instant dropper method nevertheless. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the evolution of a minecart station. Rewind.